Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Victoria Mattingly, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the SIOP Conversation Series podcast, where we talk with leading industrial organizational psychologists about a variety of trending topics and lessons learned from their professional and academic experiences. To provide you with a more fully immersive experience, we encourage you to join us here live in an Ask Me Anything style conversation. We're doing a little revamp of the conversation series, starting with this episode, number 27, which we're calling Science for a Healthier Workplace. Some of y'all might be tuning in live right now. We are live streaming across SIOPs, the Society of IO Psychology, social media platforms. We're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook right now. So I hope y'all are tuning in. Submit your questions in the comments and we can answer those live for you. For those of you listening to this as a podcast, please be sure to check out SIOP's Conversation Series webpage where you can submit future questions, share your feedback, and recommend new guests who we can interview in the future. Today, our guest discusses one of the top 10 trending topics in the field of psychology and the world of work: employee health, well-being, wellness, and safety. Welcome to the SIOP Conversation Series podcast, Dr. Keaton Fletcher.
Happy to be here.
So thrilled to have you. Keaton is an assistant professor in Georgia Tech School of Psychology. His research focuses on workplace leadership and well-being, and he answers questions like, how does becoming a leader impact your well-being? How does interacting with your leader affect your daily health behaviors? And what physiological phenomena predict leader behavior? Keaton also co-hosts the Healthy Work podcast, which shares the science of making work a healthier experience for everyone. And Keaton was also the 2021 co-champion for the SIOP Top 10 Trend of Employee Health, Wellbeing, Wellness, and Safety. He's also married to another IO psychologist, and together they have a 2-year-old son and a baby on the way who no doubt will be future IO psychologists, right, Keaton?
Definitely.
We are so glad that you could join us today, Keaton.
Thanks so much. I need you to introduce me like that every morning. That made me feel great. Thank you.
Well, it's just now you can listen to this podcast and just start. This could be your alarm when you get up every morning. I love it. So, Keaton, research has found that by mid-February, about 80% of New Year's resolutions have been abandoned. And what we're hoping to accomplish today by bringing you in as our conversation series guest is to inspire our listeners to stay committed to their healthier habits, not just for the number on the scale or upcoming swimsuit season, but to also have better outcomes in the workplace and one's career. And so, to start our conversation, let's talk about the research that you've been working on at Georgia Tech. You've investigated a lot of interesting questions related to workplace leadership and well-being. Can you tell us briefly about how leadership influences the health and well-being of leaders themselves and their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about leadership in the workplace is really two-sided, right? On the one hand, leaders can be a boon for your health and well-being, right? There's a lot of research on supervisor support, for example. Leslie Hammer, phenomenal researcher on this topic, that shows that if you've got that supportive supervision, it can really help mitigate and buffer some of the negative effects of stressors in the workplace. It can also have just a positive effect on your health overall anyways, that having that meaningful relationship with someone provides you with positive outcomes. But then on the other side, we also know that leaders can really harm your health and well-being. There's a lot of research on abusive supervision, for example, or I'm doing some work on moral injury and betrayal from leaders that shows, if supervisors are abusive and belligerent or berate you, or if they betray your trust, that can really impact obviously your stress, but also longer term, your health and well-being. And so leaders play a huge role in your workplace life, and that also means that they play a huge role in your overall life. And so I think that is one of the most meaningful relationships when it comes to your health and well-being as a person.
And that's so interesting to think about what we're experiencing with how work has just changed so substantially with COVID and virtual work, hybrid work, remote work, and everything that I've seen and what I talked about my clients is focusing on the policies and how are we going to have our hybrid policy or the practices, but the leaders, how they influence those policies, enforce those policies, those one-on-one conversations at the team level. I feel like that's even more important than, how many days a week you're supposed to come into the office or not. And so based on your experience on health and well-being in the workplace, what recommendations do you have for those leaders out there who want to, create this healthy work environment for their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I first and foremost interact with your employees. I'm right now like neck deep in data analysis from a daily diary study that shows it was done during COVID, and on days when you interacted with your leader, you're less likely to drink alcohol, or you drink less alcohol, and you eat less sugary foods and drink more water, which sounds so mundane, but even just interacting with your leader has this benefit. And then
Yeah.
on days when you do, them doing their normal good leadership behaviors. So giving you structure and tasks to do, and giving you consideration. So being there emotionally and supportive, both again also have that impact on your health and well-being. So one, interact with your subordinates. Don't micromanage them, but be there. Know that you're a presence. And then two, I think make it clear that it's okay for employees to navigate boundaries with you, that they don't always have to be on. We know that it's one of the risks right now is that people feel like they always have to be on, because we've shown we can do our jobs remotely, good and bad. And so I think helping employees navigate boundaries both with you and the organization or clients is particularly important as well.
I love that call out, and I see it all the time because my work is largely virtual, like most of us tuning in right now. And I always say, we brought work into our lives. I can literally see, people's rooms and backgrounds and kids and pets, coming in the backdrop. And so if we're bringing work into people's lives, the least we can do as employers is help people have healthier lives in the context of work to bleed over to their personal life, right? Like this, I always say work life balance, such a myth. It's integration, it's stabilization, and leaders have such an important role to play in that. So I love those tips. Thanks for those, Keaton. So let's go back to health and well-being for those who are either still committed to their New Year's resolutions or those ready to recommit to creating healthier habits. So, to inspire our leaders out there, Dr. Fletcher, what is some evidence based health and well being habits that highly effective leaders or just employees themselves should be engaging in?
I think my number one suggestion is always protect your sleep. There's a lot
Mm.
of really good research. Tori Crane does some research on sleep. And Chris Barnes actually showed that if you don't sleep well as a supervisor, that comes out for negative consequences for your employees. And so if you have a hard time justifying sleep for your own health and well-being, you at least have that evidence that it's not just bad for you, it's bad for your employees if you're not sleeping well. And so protect your sleep. And then when you're at home, try to think about actively recovering, right? Work is stressful. And so Charles Calderwood has some really cool research out there right now on like engaging in physical activity when you're home, but really just it can be tailored to what you want it to be, right? So getting either something that gives you mastery. So like working on puzzles or whittling. I don't know. That's not my hobby, cooking, right? A lot of us got into like baking bread, something that gives you mastery, something that's intentionally relaxing. So not just sitting down and watching TV, but like giving yourself a mani pedi or taking a bath or whatever it is that's intentionally relaxing for you, or something that gives you social relationships, right? We're missing out on a lot of that from our workplaces right now. And so that can also help you recover. And so being intentional about how you spend your time when you're not working and viewing it as not just disengaging and mindlessly turning on the TV, but really viewing it as an opportunity to meet those needs that you're not getting met at work.
So I love the idea of recharging. A big aha for me recently was self care isn't all just even though manis petties are certainly part of that, bubble baths, but it's also work. It's work and time and energy and resources that we need to invest in taking care of ourselves, especially as leaders. People are relying on you to show up every day and lead them and be that positive source of energy and motivation and drive. And so I love the encouragement for us us to be recharging out there. So hypothetical scenario for you, Keaton. So say a leader of a small consulting firm, a CEO maybe, couldn't sleep and was up late and getting a lot of work done, sending out the emails. She has enough emotional intelligence to put the delay send to not, reinforce working ridiculous hours. But Slack isn't as smart as that in the threads. And so some of the threads she responded to her teammates came out around 4 a.m. As IO psychologists, we know the actions are more informative than the words we say. But how does a leader come back from that when they have that challenge in this very hypothetical situation? How would you recommend the leader recovering from that to not reinforce poor sleeping and work behaviors on her team?
That's a great hypothetical question, and it reminds me of a hypothetical experience of a professor sending emails without the emotional intelligence just late into the night. I think one thing we can do is making it clear that, yes, I'm working hours that you aren't working, but that doesn't mean I expect you to work them. And so when I get new graduate students, one of the first conversations we have is like, listen, I have young children. That often means that I'm going to be working late into the night because when they're home, I'm not working, or when they're home and awake, I'm not working. And that doesn't mean I expect you to. So setting those expectations up and really abiding by them, right? I think it's easy to say that we have these expectations, but then but you didn't answer my email right away, and that's problematic. So setting those expectations up from the beginning, abiding by them, and then refreshing them, right? You can say the next day when someone responds like, hey, yeah, I was up late, Slack doesn't let me delay messages, but just a reminder, like, I don't expect you to reply right away. Especially if you're noticing your employees sort of shifting into replying right away. You can say like, you don't have to do this. And so I think, that's one of the main things is setting those expectations and really enforcing them. And the same thing goes for other similar policies, right? Like using PTO. It's one thing to say you have PTO, and it's another thing to encourage your employees to take it and actually take time off, and like doing it yourself as well. And I think part of the responsibility of a leader is role modeling those types of behaviors and setting the groundwork that this is okay and encouraged.
I love that example. I always say in the gender equity work I do, one of the best things that male leaders can do for gender equity is to take their paternity leave, right? Make it the expectation that regardless if you're a man or a woman, if you're having, an adoptive or a foster care or biological baby, take that leave, because not only is it good for you and the bonding with the baby, which you're about to go through all over again, which is a beautiful thing, but also you're making it more of the norm that this is what we're doing. And same with exactly what you said, PTO, vacation time. I always laugh at these unlimited vacation time packages. Oh, that pretty much means no vacation time because people aren't going to take it, especially in our country. But I want to go back to what you were talking about before with the emailing and technology, right? And how, with technology, it should be making our lives better, but it also has the potential to negatively impact our health and well-being, especially in these remote first COVID times that we're currently in. Can you speak to the tension between technology and workplace health and well-being?
Yeah, like you said, on the one hand, it's really been beneficial for organizations and for employees, right? We have a little bit more flexibility. We're not commuting as much, and the flip side is that we're working longer hours. Usually, people are taking their commuting time and just working, and even accounting for commuting time, they're still working longer hours just because it's there and they can. So, that's the downside is you're always on. You're also potentially being micromanaged by your supervisors, right? I mentioned that before, is that supervisors who before just felt comfortable knowing that you're in the office, so you must be working, are now like, well, I need to make sure you're working. And so they're constantly checking in. And so again, easy access to you, benefit, but downside is it's being overused because people want to micromanage you. And then similarly, in the workplace, we used to have unproductive conversations, right? They were just socially connecting and bonding with our colleagues at the proverbial water cooler, or someone just pops into your office and says hi. And you don't get that anymore. So you're working a full day, and a full day, not just 9 to 5, but 9 to 5 with no breaks, no one stopping to talk to you, even though, you might have family and kids. And so I think that's been one of the challenges too, is you've lost those social relationships. There's also some really cool work on Zoom fatigue, right? Like on the one hand, really easy now to meet with people who before you had to really work to try to meet with them. Like you and I are talking from hundreds of miles away from each other very easily. But Kristen Shockley, Ali Gabriel, and then another study by Andrew Bennett and Emily Campion, and both of those have more co-authors, but I can't remember off the top of my head. They both showed like Zoom fatigue is a real measurable thing. And, we can do things like turn off your camera when you're in meetings and make that acceptable, because, self-monitoring and always having to be on and aware of your surroundings is stressful. Turn off like the self-reflection part of the camera. Like I can see myself right now and it's very distracting. Like, am I smiling enough? Like, oh man, these wrinkles are coming in. And that's not great, so if you can turn that off. And then I think also following Stephen Rogelberg's advice of like, does this really need to be a meeting? Just because we can have this as a meeting, does it have to be like, can I handle this over email? Those are some, I think at the interface of that tension, it's still really new to the workplace technology. Like when we think about, high technology, video conferencing, it's just a few years, 10 years maybe, when we compare it to like the history of the workplace. And so we're still figuring out how to do it well.
Oh, so many good things in there. One thing I have been doing, and especially with COVID and just running a remote business, and so much of the work we all do as IO psychologists is on the screen. And I realized, I was spending almost every waking moment looking at a screen. And so I've been very intentional this year. I actually started in mid-December because I know this 80% New Year's resolutions, the abandonment stat. But I started in mid-December taking a walk every single day just to physically get out of my place, out of my space, out of my house. I'm lucky that I get to work from home. And I've also been trying to do the connection piece too, where I'll make a phone call. Who calls anyone anymore? And just have a chat with an old friend, an old colleague, just catching up to try to recreate what we lost from those water cooler conversations. Because as we all know, as IO psychologists, we need that connectedness. We need those relationships above and beyond just the transactional day-to-day at work. I'm going to take a quick pause from our questions and shout out to all the listeners tuning in right now. We see y'all tuning in from all the different channels. And so the advantage of holding these conversations live is that we get to hear from you and answer your questions. So I have one or two questions left for Keaton, but then we do have time at the end to take listener questions and, capitalize on Dr. Keaton's expertise while we have him here live. And so I encourage y'all watching out there, please put some questions in the chat. We can see those and we'll even put them on the screen so we can respond to those. But please, ask your questions so we can answer those for you today. Keaton, you have an amazing podcast called Healthy Work, where you talk about the science of making a healthier experience for everyone in the workplace. What are some, lessons learned, some tips, insights that you've had on the podcast that you could just share broadly to those out there who really want to have a healthier work life?
That's a really great question. And it's a really exciting time to be interested in healthy work. I think there's been, obviously occupational health psychology as a sub area of IO has really started to take off both in research and in practice. I was just at a sort of like, think tank session hosted by the Society for Human Resource Management about moving forward with like a mentally healthy workplace, and taking COVID as sort of like a turning opportunity for companies to put mental health first and foremost. And so the first thing is like, there's a lot of really cool research out there. And so it's really hard to boil it down, but thinking about it, first one is setting those boundaries and getting comfortable with negotiating and communicating your boundaries with your supervisor. Tammy Allen, Kristen Shockley, and Kelsey Merlot, and again, some other people have a study that just was published on how to, or a couple of studies on how to communicate those boundaries and the importance of communicating those boundaries. And it's not just, here are the hours I'm willing to work. It's, here's what I'm willing to like take from customers. Like I was mistreated by this employee or this customer that like I'm not okay with that, and I need you to protect me from this. And communicating that your boundaries about like my family's going to come first if they're calling. I'm going to have to go take care of my child, things like that. Which I recognize that's a super privileged suggestion that like there are a lot of people out there who are living paycheck to paycheck. They're in precarious employment positions. They're working multiple jobs, and so negotiating boundaries isn't like even on the table. But if you have some sort of social capital, like now is the time. I think employees have more power today than they've had in a very long time, since maybe like the height of unions in the late 50s, to try and negotiate for a better environment and workplace for yourself. And so thinking about what those boundaries are for you and then how to negotiate those with your supervisor is one tip. Another one is job crafting. So like maybe you can't negotiate boundaries, but maybe you can negotiate what it is that you're doing on the job. And so Bacher and Demirauti have some really cool research on job crafting. Have gone really deep into research on job crafting. And so finding ways to get meaning out of your work, finding ways to feel like you're doing something that like gives you a sense of accomplishment. We do know from job design research, it's important to see something from beginning to end. And a lot of our jobs, we don't necessarily have that. And so either getting components of that where you can get something from start to finish, or understanding your place in the whole product can be helpful. Finding ways to have more social and meaningfully impactful social relationships in your workplace. And then if you can't do any of that, you can't change your job, it just is what it is, reframing how you think about it. There's like a classic, really cool study with hospital facilities management workers that was looking at how they viewed their jobs, and the employees who viewed themselves as part of the care team and providing a really critical part of service to patients actually had lower rates of burnout and better overall outcomes than their counterparts who were doing the same job but didn't view it as like meaningful. And so finding ways that you can shift how you think about your job is really helpful too. And then my third point is actually shifted away from employees themselves and towards employers. Because I think one of the traps that we as occupational health psychologists, inherently, because we're psychologists, we're focused on individuals and we want to give people tips and tools to deal with the situation, but really who has the power to change the situation? That's employers, right? And so to a degree, I think it's problematic to put all of the burden of protecting your health and well-being on the employee, when really the employer shares, the responsibility and has more power to change things. And so thinking, how are you paying? Are you paying well? And are you paying for labor that we don't traditionally consider as labor? So like Alicia Grandy has a lot of really good work on emotional labor and shows it's laborious and effortful. And right now, more than ever, I think it's really important, but it often goes unpaid and unrecognized. And I think that there's like a gendered component to this too, where jobs that are coded as more feminine require a lot more emotional labor in general. And so we tend to undervalue them because we're not valuing emotional labor even on paper, right? And so that's one component. Thinking about the benefits you're providing. Are you providing high quality health insurance? And do you have parity between your mental health coverage and your physical health coverage? It's really important that you're providing both of those and signaling and making employees aware that they have those resources. Are you providing opportunities for growth and meaning both within jobs and within the organization? A lot of jobs have really worked to like trim the fat and become flatter, which is inherently meant that there's less opportunity for growth within the companies. And we know that people want to grow and develop and have meaningful jobs. And so considering that, and part of trimming the fat too has been companies were already stretched really thin, working employees to a degree, I think we can argue overloading employees. And then add on top of that COVID, we have a lot of people who are doing the jobs of 2-3 people and not necessarily getting paid for it, certainly. But even if they are, like overload is a problem. And so, and then all of this, thinking about equity, we have to really think about like any changes that we're making, are these changes going to be actually impactful in an equitable way for people based on, race, on gender, on disability, on age, and are they equally accessible and meaningful? And recognizing that, the resources that some groups need aren't going to be the same resources that other groups need, and that you're providing what all of your employees need. And if you don't feel like as an employer that you have a moral obligation to do this, which I mean, I think you do, but that's fine. We know that all of this can lead to burnout. All of this can lead to illness. So that means sick days and loss of productivity. It's increasing turnover, which right now is a huge, costly problem. And so like there's a very strong business case to really put the health and well-being of your employees, if not at the center of your decisions, at least closer to the center than it has been traditionally.
Oh, so many good tips in there, Keaton. We are so lucky to have you help us either stay committed or recommit to our health and well-being goals of 2022 and beyond. It's a journey. We do have a question in the chat, so I wanted to put that on the screen. This is from Bevan Marura. My apologies, Bevan, if I got your last name wrong there. But are there any tips you can provide for improving communication between leader and middle management and the rest of the team, the general employees?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. One of the problems is ambiguity, right? Where you feel like you're being clear and you know what you're trying to say, but your lower level employees, either because they don't have access to all the same information that you have or the same level of expertise that you have, don't understand either the judgments behind the decisions you're making or the desired outcomes. And so putting things into context as much as you can, being clear and leaning into potentially more information than less. I think right now, one of the big concerns is that people feel like decisions are made without their input, or they don't understand decisions that are made that directly impact them. And so you want to like peel back that curtain as you're communicating those decisions. And so that would be one thing. And then the other thing is providing an opportunity for voice in return, only if you're willing to actually act upon it. Let's clarify that.
Ding, ding, ding.
But like you're communicating something to your employees and then making it clear, like, hey, you can, push back, or if not push back, like this is what it is. I'm here to help you cope and navigate moving forwards, and making it clear that you are a resource, I think are particularly important there.
Oh, I love that. We do have another question here. I want to pop that on the screen as well. If research has shown that emotional intelligence is as important as intellectual intelligence, if not more so, why don't we give as much importance to EQ whenever we're choosing leaders?
Oh man, Sherlix, I'm really sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but I love this question because not only is it about like emotional intelligence, but we can also consider it like non-technical skills. So even just like the behaviors themselves, that consideration, transformational leadership, all of these behaviors that are really about making people keeping people motivated and keeping them engaged with their work, making them feel good about working and the jobs. We know that that's more predictive consistently of better outcomes than more traditional, just like you are good at your job, right? And why, I don't know. I think historically we've had like a hierarchical system of we reward good task performance with a promotion, and a promotion inherently means you're now a supervisor, when potentially that's not the best thing, right? Like you can have a really great surgeon who has no business being like the head of that department, right? And like the only way to reward them is to give them that promotion. And so I think we need to restructure organizations where we can make lateral transitions equally rewarding and impactful. And so then we can recognize that, a supervisory job has a very different set of requirements and distinctions, and required abilities and behaviors than entry level or lower level positions. And that's okay. We just need to select for it separately, and already we do in some capacity. We consider leadership ability, we consider personality largely in those selections. But I think we can be more impactful and also recognize that that's going to have ripple effects on our compensation and our structure of jobs. And so I think the answer to your question is because it's part of a bigger system, and it's really hard to change the whole system. And we try to change just a part, but then everything else falls apart.
Well, and something I love about being an IO psychologist and also being a business owner, like we get that opportunities for system change within each organization. Each organization is its own ecosystem. Of course, there are societal factors that, come in the market and what's going on in the current, stage we are in society. But, there is a lot of control, especially at the executive level, and caring about the well-being of your employees. As Keaton mentioned before, not just a moral imperative, but also it's good business. Losing employees, loss to productivity, empathy, that hits the bottom line. And emotional intelligence, caring about your people first, knowing when things aren't working without being told, having that ability to have the pulse on your employees is so crucial for organizational leaders. I could continue talking about this all day, but unfortunately, that is all the time we have. For those listening in either live or with the replay on the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. Keaton, on behalf of SIOP, all of our listeners, thank you for engaging and enlightening us with your expertise in wellness, worker health, well-being, and thank you for taking the time just to speak with us today.
Thank you. Yeah. Find me at Dr. K.A. Fletcher on Twitter or follow Healthy Work Podcast. I think our Twitter handle is Healthy Work Pod. Yeah, I've appreciated it. Thank you.
Of course, and we'll add those links into the replays. Please, if you enjoyed the conversation today, please let us know. Please join us for the next conversation on March 24th at 11:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again, Dr. Keaton, for joining us today. Thank you for all those listening out there. We look forward to talking to you again soon. And until next time, we encourage you to use science to make a healthier workplace, and of course, engage with SIOP, who are making a smarter workplace every day through our work together as IO psychologists. Thank you so much, Keaton.
Thanks. Bye.